Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. First of all, I'd like to thank you for attending. We're excited to have you here and look forward to sharing with you the 5 keys for selecting the right building automation system for your facility. This topic should be of particular interest if you're currently looking to upgrade or purchase a new building automation system. For those who aren't already familiar with Computrols, we are a US manufacturer of building automation controls based in Gretna, just outside New Orleans, and we are primarily known for our HVAC control system. Some of our differentiating factors would be our lifetime warranty, our ability to integrate to just about any third-party system, including a lot of our competitors' legacy systems, our drive to empower the end user through simplicity in everything we do or make, and we excel in removing lifecycle costs from building automation systems. So just a little housekeeping before we get underway. Please leave your cameras off and microphones muted for the best experience for everyone. For those of you attending today, we'll be supplying a link to the webinar slides in the chat room area at the bottom of the screen at the end of the webinar. They'll be available as a PDF download. The webinar is being recorded and a link will be emailed to everyone who is registered. And finally, questions can be asked in the chat room by accessing the chat bubble at the bottom of the screen. We expect the webinar to last around 40 minutes or so today, and with time at the end to answer any questions. So without further ado, allow me to introduce you to our Director of Sales and Marketing, Mr. Scott Holstein, who has been with Computrols for over 5 years now, and like me, came into the industry brand new and having to learn it from scratch. Scott has quickly become an authority within the industry by creating and pushing out a huge amount of educational content, such as today's webinar, that will better inform those in our industry and shine a small spotlight onto building automation so that it may hit the radar of graduates. With that, I'll hand you over. Scott, if you're ready, please take it away.
Thanks for that introduction, Simon. As Simon said, I am Scott Holstein. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing for Computrols, and what we're here to talk about today is understanding what's important when selecting a building automation system for your particular facility. And one of the really important things to emphasize here is your particular situation, and we'll make sure we hit on as many of those scenarios as possible, but I do encourage you all to come to me with questions in terms of what your situation might be so we can answer those questions more specifically. But getting this underway, we're going to first talk about the understanding the importance of the building automation system altogether. So the real obvious things that building automation systems do are they control things like HVAC, lights, locks, fire alarm systems, things like that. But what we have to look at this as is not just what they control, but what they can, thinking about what they control and how that benefits the building occupants in your facility. So we're looking at things like comfort, the health of your occupants, the safety, and overall productivity. Comfort, health, and safety are 3 that we hear quite a bit. Productivity rather is one that we don't hear as much, but really can play into a corporate facility in particular. So with the example of a corporate-owned facility, you are looking at having your own employees, essentially, your coworkers working within that facility. And it's been proven time after time now that under the right conditions, where somebody has the proper temperature, the proper lighting, and they feel good in their environment, that they are more productive. And now we're seeing a lot of studies coming out with information about how the air quality can also affect productivity. So productivity is not one that everybody always thinks about, but is more important than we may even consider at times. And then the obvious one is energy consumption. So building automation systems are going to heavily influence the consumption of energy in your facility. But one thing that I like to make clear to everyone is a building automation system by itself is not going to reduce energy consumption. It's not going to find energy savings for you. It's simply a tool to operate those systems that consume the most energy in your facility. So when you're looking at things like energy consumption, you're not looking at, okay, well, I'm going to put a VFD on this air handler and I'm going to save a percentage of my energy consumption just based on that installation. You can only really save what's being wasted when you're talking about building automation. So you want a building automation system that you're going to have visibility into, and you're going to be able to decipher what those opportunities are. And then how does it affect your business? So I use the corporate real estate example, but when we're looking at things like commercial real estate and tenant retention, tenant satisfaction being the really most important metric when it comes to commercial real estate property management, making sure that your tenants are comfortable in that space and not having to call to say it's too hot, it's too cold, that has a real effect in dollars and cents on your business. So keeping that in mind, and then we look at healthcare facilities, for example. Healthcare facilities in an OR room, you're required to have so much pressure in a given space. You're required to have a certain humidity level in that space. And the building automation system has quite a bit of influence on that. And really, when you're looking at how it affects the healthcare business, it's more from a liability perspective for healthcare. Now we look at something like a data center. Data centers are becoming even bigger and bigger these days, but server efficiency and making sure that your server uptime is as high as possible, or that percentage of uptime is as high as possible. Again, it's more of a liability approach as you're considering how it affects your business, but it's extremely important. And that building automation system is going to be in your building for many, many years to come. Building automation systems generally live in that building for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years even. So that decision that you make with a building automation vendor is going to be different than what you would make with a cleaning vendor or a flooring vendor. Those are a little bit more easily replaceable and interchangeable, as opposed to a building automation service partner that's going to be in your building, affecting the comfort, health, safety, and productivity of your building occupants for many years. So then when you talk about looking beyond the initial price tag, and this seems, if you start to think about these kinds of decisions when you're looking at large investments, when you're looking at systems and pieces of equipment that are going to be around for many years, and the effect that they're going to have, you want to look beyond that initial price tag, because frankly, that ongoing cost could end up being far more than the initial price if you go the cheap route, maybe. So we look at things that like maintenance agreements. What are you paying in maintenance agreements today? What does that maintenance agreement get you? Does it have so many hours of labor? Does it have software updates? Or is it just really giving you access to the service level that you need? And then you look at service calls as well. How many service calls do you have on average? How much time is your building staff spending with your service partner running those service calls? And we look at recurring licensing fees as well. So licenses in building automation systems, we'll start with software licenses. Software as a service has become very common in our industry. It's become very common across the board, but with software as a service, you are going to have recurring fees to essentially rent that software to operate your system. So you have to factor that in when you're looking at the O&M cost of these systems is, okay, do I have to upgrade the software every year, or is it an option? If I don't upgrade this year and I upgrade next year, is it going to cost me more? Then you look at things like protocol licenses. So if you integrate to an existing system, are you paying license fees for that particular protocol on an ongoing basis? There are ongoing fees that you just need to be aware of and make sure you get those questions answered on the front end. And then I mentioned before, I mentioned the service call example, but how much time is your building operations team spending troubleshooting the system, answering hot and cold calls, and spending time with vendors to make sure that things are running as efficiently and smoothly as possible? That time that your building operations team is taking, it's not only the cost of that, it's also the opportunity cost of what could they be doing otherwise. And then controller and software upgrades are another big one. We mentioned software upgrades. You're not necessarily getting a upgrade in software. However, it may be framed that way, but you may have some ongoing fees related to the software. And then when it comes to controllers, you always have the concern of when a particular line of controllers is going to be deemed obsolete by a building automation manufacturer. We typically see controller lifespans between 5 and 10 years, but consider where you are in the life cycle of that product. So when you buy a product, if it's been out for 10 plus years, maybe you ask your service partner, I understand this has been around a while. Do I need to be concerned about this being obsolete and having to upgrade that controller? Because that is a very real problem we see in the building automation industry. And then we look at things like a warranty, what warranties cover, how long they last. If you're coming into an existing building that has controllers, does that warranty transfer to new ownership, to new property management? You want to understand exactly what that's going to cover for you. You also have to factor in hardware failure. In a given year, especially if you're running a large facility, you're going to have sensors, controllers, other pieces of that infrastructure potentially go bad on you, where you're going to need to replace that hardware. And is it something that you can do in-house? Is it something that you're going to have your service partner come out for? What is that cost going to be when it comes? You really want to have a good understanding of that. And that kind of lends itself to system expansion as well, where if you're in a hospital and you're renovating a wing, or you're in a commercial real estate office and you're doing a tenant improvement project, you want to know about what you're getting into in terms of costs. And again, considering what your internal team might be able to help with to reduce costs, and what all goes into that. So asking your vendor to maybe go back and look at some of the previous projects that you've done and give you estimated prices for that wouldn't be a bad idea, because then you have a good sense for what your costs may be. And then, we mentioned energy cost savings. It's not as simple as changing out an old piece of equipment for a new piece of equipment and having, a certain percentage of energy savings essentially guaranteed. It is, though, important to know that you have, competent technicians working with you, that your building operations team can go and use this system and potentially identify those inefficiencies and make adjustments accordingly. And then, like I mentioned before, understanding that that service partner is not like all of your other service partners. They're going to be around for a very long time. And frankly, it's usually difficult to go out and just find another service partner for a building automation system. So when you're evaluating these partners, I always recommend getting references. And not only getting references, but also asking the right questions to those references. Like, tell me about a time where service partner A messed up and how they resolved the issue for you. Frankly, no one's perfect, and you're going to run into those issues. You just want to know when it happens that they're going to be there and they're going to back up their product, their service, with everything that they're promising you. And the references that you're going to get from service partners are going to be their best customers. They're going to be people who generally will sing their praises. So you want to dig into it a little bit deeper when you're talking to these references and get a sense for what happens when things go bad. So then running through scenarios, similarly to trying to figure out what happens when things go bad. Talk to your service partner about what happens when I have a sensor go bad. Is that something that my building staff can go and change out sensors? What happens when a VAV goes bad? Or what happens when I'm having hot and cold calls come in from a certain area? What does that look like? Do I call your service line? Can I troubleshoot it myself? Give give them scenarios to run through so they can tell you what to expect. And then, as I mentioned before, get budgetary quotes for your last renovation projects so you understand what you're getting into the next time you have a renovation, tenant improvement, etc., where you're going to have a better sense for what that cost might look like. And then also understand what your options are if the relationship sours. I don't usually go into the question of, is your system open? Because first of all, open has very different meanings to everybody, to all different people. So you really want to understand at the end of the day, if things go bad, what are my options? And the best time to ask this question is before you engage with that company, because after the fact, you've lost all your leverage, and they can essentially drive you whatever direction they want to drive you. So you want to know when something goes bad, do I have to put in a new front end on my building automation system for somebody else to take it over? Are there other vendors who can service this system? Do I have all of the rights and access that I need to operate this system autonomously or to give it over to somebody else? These are all scenarios, again, you want to run through before you make that final commitment. So where is your starting point and what are your options? As I mentioned, I want to run through some potential scenarios, and I invite everybody who has a specific scenario that they're dealing with right now, if they have a question about it, to ask. That's the only way that you're going to get the best answer for your scenario. So starting off, we won't spend too much time on this, but going in and talking about new construction. So presumably most of you who are on our webinar today are currently building operators in an existing facility. And oftentimes with new construction, the operations team may not even be selected by the time construction gets started. So if you are involved in the new construction process in any capacity, getting the owners of this building and getting the decision makers to understand that in the construction process, a lot of times you're dealing with a general contractor who's going to select a mechanical contractor, who's going to select a controls contractor. And in new construction, more often than not, the low bid comes out the winner. And so the mechanical is going to select the lowest bidding controls contractor so they can be the lowest bidding mechanical contractor. But what you have to ask yourself is, do you really want the lowest bidder of the lowest bidder in this building for the next 10 plus years? And maybe the answer is yes. And it's not all about whether or not the bid is the lowest bid for new construction, but you need to truly understand the profound effect that these service providers can have on a building's success or lack thereof for the next decade. So now getting into existing buildings. Existing buildings, we look at existing buildings through three different lenses here in terms of options. First is upgrade, which is probably one of the simpler options. So upgrading your system typically means staying with the same service provider, and then upgrading to whatever their latest software and/or hardware upgrade is. As I mentioned before, this is something that happens in our industry. You're going to be asked to upgrade your software and/or hardware to make the two compatible at times. And so if you're happy with your service provider, you think this is a fair price and it's something that I think is timely, let's do this. Upgrading could be a good option for you. Then we look at integration as an option. And integration, in an integration situation, typically you're looking to move away from your existing service partner, and you're assessing your options for integration because you don't want to have to start from scratch. You don't want to have to take everything out and start over. So an integration, you're looking to use as much of your existing infrastructure, as many of your existing controllers as you possibly have, and taking it over with a new system. Now, in an integration scenario, two things we want to understand is what level of control will you have after that integration? Oftentimes, integrators can, quote unquote, integrate to a system, but have limited control of the subcontrollers down the line. They have the ability to monitor those, but may not necessarily have the command that you're looking for. So understand what control you're going to have after that initial integration. And then the big question is, what's next? After that integration happens and a controller fails, where do we go from there? Do we need to run new COM wire? Can we put one of your controllers on this same communication bus? Do we need to rip out the entire communication bus and put all new controllers in? That's really, in an integration scenario, what you want to understand is beyond that initial integration, we've got everything working. What happens when A, B, C occurs? And then replacement is definitely the simplest, but also the most costly approach in existing buildings. I won't spend too much time on this because it's fairly simple. You have an old control system, maybe it's pneumatic, maybe it's no longer supported by the manufacturer, maybe the manufacturers were acquired, and you just said, look, I'm not messing with this, I'm starting from scratch. So you're running all new wire, you're putting all new controllers, and like I said, it's not always the worst option, but it's typically the most costly. One thing I didn't include on this slide was system integration beyond what we were talking about. So we talked about basically you're bringing in another service partner to integrate to your existing controllers, existing network. Integration in building automation can also mean integrating multiple systems. So we talk a lot about HVAC control. However, a lot of these systems now encompass lighting control, access control, fire alarm systems, energy metering, tenant overtime systems, indoor air quality systems. There's so much more that could potentially impact your building. Now, when we look at the pros and cons of integrating multiple systems, we'll first look at the pros. And you say, okay, well, now I have one less service partner I have to deal with, because now I have the same people coming to my building to do the access control that do the HVAC control. That's certainly some advantage to that. However, beyond that, system integration also gives you some creative options on how to operate your building. In climates that are mild enough, you might, let's say you have an access, lighting, and HVAC control system all under the same platform. Rather than starting up the floor or an area or a zone immediately in the morning at the same time, you may wait until the first individual on that floor swipes their card at the parking garage or the lobby, because you know that now somebody's here. Now we can start. You turn on the lights, you start up the AC. And it does kind of give you that extra level of control. And we always look at ways to minimize energy consumption, and frankly, starting pieces of equipment, even 5, 10, 30 minutes later, makes a difference. And you multiply that across multiple floors, multiple buildings. When you're looking at larger facilities, that can really make a dent in your energy consumption. So the cons of system integration, along with the pro of I have one less vendor, potentially one less headache, it could also put you in a bind where it's like, okay, well, now I'm not happy with this particular service partner, and they are responsible for not only my access control but also my HVAC control. So you are putting more of your eggs in one basket in that capacity, along with you're putting more eggs in that basket in terms of access. So we talk about cybersecurity a lot, and the building automation industry has really come full circle on this because, many years ago, having all of these things under one platform was really attractive. And then as cybersecurity became more of a concern, they say, well, if they can get into my lighting control system, then they could also get into my access control system, and that becomes more problematic. So yes, you are putting more of your eggs in one basket in that capacity. However, there are a lot of ways to mitigate risk when it comes to protecting those systems from a cybersecurity perspective. So that's something that you'll want to discuss with any of your potential service partners. So making an organizational decision when it comes to capital expenditures is probably a good idea across the board, but certainly when it comes to building automation systems. The first thing I would do as an organization is to make sure you have the right people at the table. Get the O&M team there. It's incredibly important. I'll talk about that more in just a second, and discuss the goals for your facility. So how long are you going to own the asset? If it's a short hold and you're looking to get as much of a return on your investment on the sale as possible, maybe that initial purchase price of a building automation system is really important because the O&M is not going to fall under your organization. Then consider what's going to add the most value for you. And how does your facility operate? Is it a hospital that runs 24/7? Is it a data center that runs 24/7? Or is it a commercial real estate building that shuts down at 5? There are systems that are better suited for particular applications. And then considering whether or not your team has the bandwidth and skill set to work with the system internally. So rather than being dependent on a vendor to come in and service the system every time you run into an issue, what ability do you have to operate the system in-house? And are any of these service partners offering an additional layer of access or support? So I mentioned earlier, bringing everybody to the table is so important. I can't tell you the number of experiences I've had where it is the operations team's job to go out and find potential vendors, to get 3 quotes, get 3 bids, and then it goes into the purchasing team's hands. And oftentimes the O&M team is not at the table for that decision. And that is, it's a huge mistake in my opinion, because this is a vendor that they are going to have to work with on a very regular basis for a very long time. As I mentioned before, that has, profound effects on the success of your facility. So having that group there is going to be very important, because they're going to point out things that may not show up in the proposal, that may not show up in that initial bid. They're the ones who are going to bring up the O&M challenges potentially down the line for particular vendors. And then something I've heard about that I really like the approach of is using a point-based system. Understanding that certain things are more important to your organization. Is it important to your organization to have spare controllers on site? Is it important to your organization to be able to operate the system in-house to a degree? Is it important to your organization to have some, so when you have a service call, to have somebody there within 24 hours? Using a point-based system allows you to prioritize those things, and you can assess vendors very fairly just using that system. And then one of the things I've learned from a property manager recently was assigning real dollars to non-monetary attributes. And this could be challenging, and it's similar in a way to the points-based system. So this is why you want your O&M team at the table, where they were assessing these vendors from the very beginning. They brought this vendor A in. Vendor A basically came in the building, walked around for 45 minutes, and put together a quote. Vendor B came in and sat down, asked the engineer, what are the problems you're having today? What are you trying to solve? They sent people back twice to do additional due diligence to make sure that their proposal had everything that it needed. Those are things that the building engineer is going to be able to identify and say,
I don't know about vendor A because of this, something that happened. Or, I called vendor A and they didn't return my call for a week. Or you run into these issues where it's like, okay, well, let's say that, thoroughness in the process was something that is not necessarily has a real dollar amount, at least on the front end. You may end up paying for it on the back end. But putting a dollar amount to, how thorough were they in their assessment and proposal is something that you may include in there. And then other non-monetary attributes that, are important, again, to your organization. So the fifth and final key to selecting the right building automation system for your facility is understanding what a return on this investment looks like. So for new construction or a building that didn't, or I suppose if they didn't have a building automation system prior, there's certainly a return there as well. But if you don't have a basis for comparison, it's going to be difficult to assess what your ROI is. So looking back historically at either how the building's operated or what you've paid in service fees and things like that can end up really influencing what that ROI looks like. So, first and foremost, was there energy savings? You have to have a benchmark to be able to say that definitively. Then looking at your operational savings, how much time historically have we spent responding to complaints? Have we spent with our vendor walking throughout the building, troubleshooting? And then, if, let's say, in the process of installing your new system and you recommission things, you notice that you've been getting false readings on a lot of your equipment where something's been running around the clock, even though it says it's been going on and off. Dampers have been open when they say they're closed. You're looking at potentially not only energy savings there, but also saving or reducing the life of the equipment if it's running around the clock. So you could be expanding the life of that equipment, therefore not having to replace it as frequently. And then looking at the, did you have a service agreement before? What were you paying for that? What were you paying for service calls, maintenance costs? And then if you're able to do some of that in-house now, how much time are you spending doing it in-house versus paying for that service call? And does your team now have access to the tools and software and what they need to be able to address those issues as much as possible, as much as they can in-house? And then reduced controller failure is another one I added on here, which is, again, you need to have historical information to be able to calculate an ROI on this. What were you spending on replacing controllers over the last 3+ years on average? And then when you got this new system, are the controllers more reliable? And are they lasting longer? Things like that. So I want to kind of recap here. We covered a lot in a short period of time, but the overarching message here is, understanding first and foremost that this is a very big decision, and it's going to be something that affects the operations of your building for a very long time. So there's a lot more to consider with this vendor than there is most other vendors in your facility. If you're not happy with the cleaning crew you hire a new cleaning crew. They come in, and really probably not a lot of lag time, not a lot of operations deficiencies as a result of it. It's just not the same for building automation systems. These are systems that are going to very much affect the way that your facilities operate for a very long time. So having an understanding of these things is extremely important. And again, I want to thank everybody who has stuck around for our webinar this entire time. And I'd like to open up for questions now. Simon, any questions?
Not at the minute, Scott.
All right. Well, while we're waiting, we'll give everybody a couple minutes if they're typing up their questions here. Just wanted to let everybody know that these webinars are something we do on a regular basis. As Simon mentioned, we try to provide a lot of educational content. Something that we'll provide after this webinar here is an ebook that we've put together on the life cycle costs of these systems. We've talked a lot about that here today. We'll link you over to our Building Technology podcast, as well as a means of signing up for our newsletter that just went out today, in fact. And we want to make sure that you have access to all of the educational resources we put together. Simon also mentioned, he and I came into this industry with very little experience with, the controls industry or frankly, the industry and the devices that are controlled by these controls. And we kind of struggled through it a little bit. And luckily, in the last few years, I've seen a lot more resources for this kind of information. But that was a part of what drove us to start providing this ourselves, as we just didn't find it anywhere else. So if you all have any ideas or any specific questions that you'd like to see answered in a webinar format, podcast, or any other, we love to hear back from you. All right. Well, everyone, you can see on the screen now that we have our info@ and sales@ email addresses here. In case you come up with any questions or would like some additional assistance on assessing building automation systems, this is an area, obviously, we feel like we have some expertise and would love to help you. So with that said, thank you all for attending our webinar, and have a great day.